As soon as they stepped into the dungeon, Snow couldn't help but comment on how weird Monique was acting. Meanwhile, Monique was thinking about how Snow, their mage, was anything but calm. Back to the two of them, Snow mentioned how she found it odd, fully expecting Monique to complain when he heard that another mage was coming in to help them. She was used to hearing the typical just relax kind of complaints, something mages like her get all the time. But Snow, she's not the kind of person who follows anyone's rules, Monique replied, saying he wasn't that kind of mage either because he doesn't really follow what others say. Plus, in his opinion, Snow was already a brilliant mage as she was. That sudden compliment caught her off guard, but at the same time, it stroked her ego. Riding that wave of confidence, she told Monique to watch her show off some brilliant ice magic. Monique didn't mind at all that Snow was a bit emotionally unstable. In fact, he respected her as a fellow mage. The reason they were deep in the dungeon? Snow was searching for more power, and now they'd reached the 10th layer. She couldn't help but ask Monique why he chose this specific level, out of all the ones they've conquered so far. Monique reminded her of the time before Rod joined them, and there was a light bulb moment, a memory of their battle with the magic turtle. That turtle was a real pain. It had ridiculously strong resistance to both magical and physical attacks, not to mention its long-range magic abilities, even though it was slow. Back then, all of Snow's attacks were useless against it, and because it was considered a small fry, they came at the group in swarms. Monique tried using his accumulate skill, but even that was no match for their numbers. It was a complete disaster for their team, until Sandra showed up and wiped out those turtles like it was nothing. Back in the present, Snow questioned why Monique had chosen this layer out of nowhere, but to her, it wasn't sudden at all. The memory of that day was burned into her mind, and no matter how many spells she learned or how hard she trained, the defeat from back then still haunted her. A small voice in her head kept whispering that she couldn't even take down those small fry. She didn't want Monique to realize how much it bothered her, especially since he always saw her as a skilled mage. His confidence in her was what got her this far, but now she felt stuck, unable to move forward unless she could overcome this challenge on her own. Despite his calm demeanor, Monique knew how much it was eating her up inside. He didn't want to push her, though. He was here to support her, not hold her back. That's why he casually patted her head, catching Snow off guard. He didn't pull his hand away and asked if she was feeling any better. Snow pouted before leaning into him for a hug, admitting that she wasn't as strong as she thought. Monique, in her eyes, was the strongest among them. Monique was ready to argue that point, already thinking that being strong was the last thing that described him. But Snow cut him off, saying it was because he made sure everyone felt safe and reassured. The fact that he could admit he wasn't a fighter was what made him truly strong, unlike her who was always scared, pretending to be brave, when she was really just a fool in disguise. Hearing Snow say that made Monique place a reassuring hand on her shoulder, reminding her that all of that was in the past. This time, if she used her full power, she could easily handle those turtle mages. From her perspective, Monique was a genius, a mage at the highest level, so she begged him to let her witness how he would break through the next barrier. Monique chuckled at all the praise and told her that they should grab a meal after they finished this. Since he was the one who dragged her along, it was only fair that he treated her, though he jokingly added that it might depend on the bill. Snow laughed, teasing him that he should have just promised her anything she wanted. But that conversation would have to wait. Her focus snapped back to the horde of turtle mages approaching. She smirked at the creatures, announcing that she wasn't the same person she was a year ago, and then activated her abilities. In her mind, her first failure was because she didn't believe she was as powerful as the others, and that defeat had stuck with her ever since. But this time was different. Now, she wasn't going to hold anything back. With that, Snow unleashed her ice cannon, obliterating the turtle mages in one powerful strike. Monique stood proudly beside her, genuinely impressed by how Snow's magic worked. Unlike most mages who usually kept a cold and serious aura, Snow was different. She laughed and cried when she felt like it, a perfect reflection of her magic's grace and elegance. She finished off the last of the turtle mages, and as Monique walked over to her, he showered her with praise while she caught her breath. Snow flashed him a bright smile as they pressed on, moving deeper into the dungeon with Monik following close behind. Monik reminded her not to get too carried away, though he was clearly relieved that she was back to her usual self. Just as they were about to move further, Monik stopped her, asking how far she really planned on going. He pointed out that there were only warp points at the entrance and the boss room. Speaking of the boss room, did she seriously plan on facing the boss alone? Even she knew that was a bit much, so Monik suggested they head back while she still had some mana left. Suddenly, something felt off. There were no monsters in sight, which was strange, since trash mobs were supposed to respawn no matter how many times they'd been wiped out. A sinking feeling hit them both, and Monik told her to stay alert. Out of nowhere, a massive hole opened up beneath them, swallowing them whole. When Snow opened her eyes, she realized Monik was hunting her, which caused her to fall back. Our poor hero could only groan in pain as Monik asked if she was okay. Snow assured him she was fine, but more importantly, what just happened? The two turned their heads to see a giant golem kneeling before them. Both of them were confused, wondering if they had landed in the boss room, but something didn't add up. There was a hallway behind the golem, which shouldn't be accessible unless they defeated the boss of that level. Wait, could this be an extra floor? Snow asked, not fully grasping the idea. Monik pointed to the treasure cache next to the golem and explained a rumor about a mysterious level built by an ancient civilization. He suggested the golem was likely its guardian, but since they had no data on it, they couldn't gauge its power. With the monster still asleep, Monik quickly proposed they head down the hallway, assuming there must be an exit somewhere along the way. As soon as Snow took a step forward, the golem creaked to life. Snow quickly suggested distracting it somehow, but then a rumbling sound echoed through the place. Before Snow could cast a spell, Monik shoved him aside just in time, right as a creature that looked like a beefed-up version of Donkey Kong came crashing through where they were standing. The thing let out a deafening roar, sending Monik into a brief moment of panic. "Ah, no?" Monik muttered, grabbing Snow and pulling him into the hallway for cover. Once they made it to safety, both of them paused to catch their breath. "What was that thing?" Snow asked, still shaken. Monik took a quick glance around and muttered, "If Donkey Kong here is anything like the dragon we took down yesterday, this extra floor might be way deeper than we thought." He pointed to the scattered corpses around them. "Looks like the others who came through here didn't expect that either." Suddenly, the ground shook again. Donkey Kong shoved his massive hand into the hallway, swiping blindly in an attempt to reach them. Snow nervously asked, "Is it gonna get in here?" Monik quickly assessed the situation. "No, it's stuck. As long as we're in the tunnel, we should be safe. The most it can get in here is maybe a finger or two." With no way to head back, they decided to press forward. After a few steps into the hallway, they spotted a door that seemed to lead somewhere. Hopefully somewhere less filled with rampaging gorilla monsters. They sprinted toward the door, and just as Snow predicted, it was a warp point. Monik, though, was busy wondering aloud if the area behind it led to some kind of treasure room, possibly part of the extra floor. Snow, less impressed with treasure when his life was on the line, didn't even bother to care. He was more than ready to head home. But of course, fate had other plans. Just as they got close to the warp point, Snow realized something was wrong. It wasn't working. Monik explained the obvious reason. They hadn't defeated the boss yet. Even on normal floors, the warp point won't activate unless the boss is beaten. Monik sighed. Same rule applies here. If the gate's not unlocked, the warp won't work. The real kicker? Donkey Kong might not even be the main boss on this extra floor. Monik pointed out that this condition could be true for some other boss they hadn't even seen yet. Snow, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and dread, blurted out, "Wait, are you saying we can't get out of here unless we take down that thing?" Monik's mind was racing, trying to figure out a loophole, though deep down, he knew it was probably pointless. Donkey Kong was way beyond their reach, and even if they had their entire party with them, it would still end in disaster. He realized they wouldn't be able to survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. If only they could activate the warp point, everything would be fine. As if on cue, the rumbling got louder, and the sound of Donkey Kong smashing through the tunnel echoed around them. But Monik wasn't ready to give up yet. His brain kept churning through ideas until, bam, he remembered something important. A plan formed in his mind. Turning to Snow, he practically blurted out, "I got it. I know how we can activate the warp point." Snow looked at him confused. "Wait, what? Now you tell me." Monik grinned sheepishly. "Yeah, sorry for the delay. I've done some research on warp points in the past, and I know how they work. Basically, if I can channel some mana into it, we can activate it manually." "Seriously? You could have mentioned that earlier." Snow teased, shaking his head, but there was a glint of hope in his eyes. Monik's confidence was infectious, and now they had a real shot at getting out of this mess. Hearing that bit of news was enough to lift Snow's spirits. "Wait, are you telling me we can actually get out of here without taking down that monster?" "In theory, yeah," Monik replied, already digging through his storage pouch. "But we've got some prep work to do first." Snow watched as Monik rummaged around, explaining that activating a warp point, especially one as advanced as this, was no small feat. It would drain a lot of mana, so to make sure there was enough space to handle it, they needed to offload some stuff. Monik tossed Snow his own pack, telling him to start packing their essentials. "Take good care of this, okay?" Monik said, handing over his personal bag. "Everything important's in there, including my wallet." Snow raised an eyebrow but complied, stuffing the bag into his own, while muttering under his breath about how this felt like a lot of responsibility all of a sudden. "Oh, and while we're at it," Monik added casually, sauntering over to the nearby treasure chest. After a moment of inspecting the contents, he pulled out a ring and, without a second thought, slipped it onto Snow's finger. Snow blinked, caught off guard. "Ah, Monik, of all the places you chose to put it on this finger." He looked down at the ring, feeling like it was some kind of strange vow exchange, on his right hand though, not the left. Still, it was oddly sentimental, and Snow wasn't sure how to feel about it. Monik didn't seem to catch the awkwardness as he smiled and said, "Perfect fit, huh? Oh, by the way, that ring will boost your magic, reduce mana cost, and has some handy buffs built in." Snow nodded, still feeling the weight of the ring, both literally and figuratively, as he prepared for whatever came next. With his hand resting on the warp point, Snow followed suit, watching Monik intently as he prepared to activate it. Monik had just told him to ask an expert about the ring later, which was honestly low-key weirding Snow out. "Hold up," Snow said. "What aren't you telling me?" Monik, trying to dodge the question, chuckled nervously. "Why ask me now? It's not a big deal." But Snow wasn't letting it go. "Not a big deal. You just slipped a magic ring on my finger and now you're telling me to consult someone else about it. Why can't you just explain it now?" Monik paused, the air between them growing heavier. After a moment of silence, he finally admitted, "I'm not really great at lying, am I?" He sighed, then explained, "To activate the warp, someone needs to maintain the mana flow, and I planned on staying behind." As the words sank in, Snow's eyes widened, panic setting in. "Wait, what? No way. You're not staying here." His voice cracked as he felt a lump forming in his throat. But Monik was already making his move. The warp was activated, its soft glow filling the place, and Snow realized with a sinking heart that his friend had made up his mind. "Monik, let go. You can't do this." Monik gave a small, sad smile. "I have to, Snow. I can't let Stormbreaker go down like this." His voice was firm, but there was a warmth behind it, a finality. "But I have one request. Make sure everyone reaches the deepest level of the dungeon." Before Snow could argue or try to stop him, the warp pulled him away. Monik's figure vanished, and just like that, Snow was gone, leaving his friend behind with one last mission. Snow couldn't help but remember the time he had asked Monik why he didn't carry a staff. He'd had casually added, "I mean, you won't be able to dish out much power without one, right?" Monik, ever laid back, just smiled and said, "That's because I'm a support mage." But he didn't stop there. He went on, explaining a bit further, and it kinda hit Snow differently this time. "Offensive mages, they aim their magic at enemies," Monik had said. Think about what's probably going through their heads in battle. They're focusing on making their attacks stronger, faster, sharper. He paused, letting that sink in for a second. That's why they use staffs. It helps control that fierce energy. Then Monik shifted the conversation, getting a bit more personal. But me? As a support mage, my magic isn't aimed at the enemy. It's for my allies, for other people. He gestured with his hands like he was cradling something precious. It's my job to hold them up, to comfort them when things get tough, to literally lend a hand when they feel alone. Monik had even reached out then, linking his arm with Snow's in this comforting way, saying, "It's also my role to give them a boost when they need it. So, if I walked around with a staff, it'd feel wrong, out of place." He let that sink in, finishing with a soft smile. The important thing isn't the weapon you hold, but what you do with your magic, and that it comes from the heart. It was one of those moments that stayed with Snow, making him rethink what power really meant. As Snow was about to hear more about what magic meant to Monik, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Slowly opening his eyes, he found Sandra S. and Rain standing over him, concern written on their faces. He blinked, confused, and asked where they were. "We're at the entrance of the dungeon," S replied calmly, while Rain chimed in, explaining how they'd been searching for him after they lost track of him. Apparently, they had spotted him coming out of the warp. But then Rain's next words hit him like a punch to the gut. "Where's Monik? Wasn't he with you?" Those words, they dragged Snow's mind into a spiral of guilt. Dark thoughts swarmed in, and he started blaming himself. This is all my fault. The weight of everything he left behind, the decisions he made, it all came crashing down. But how could he even begin to apologize to them for what had happened? Rain, noticing Snow trembling, quickly realized something was wrong. He was on the verge of a panic attack. Without missing a beat, she signaled the rest of the team to help, trying to pull Snow out of his downward spiral before it consumed him. Meanwhile, back at the extra layer of the dungeon, Monik let out a sigh of relief. At least the teleportation had worked, and Snow was safe. But he knew Snow was going to be furious, probably fuming mad, that Monik had pulled a stunt like that. The sound of Donkey Kong smashing through the corridors grew louder and louder, yet Monik remained unfazed. He had already accepted that this was the end of his journey. As the vibrations rattled the ground beneath him, Monik spoke softly to himself, almost like he was talking to his old master. "I did my best, just like you always told me," he whispered, remembering the way his mentor used to say that no matter the situation, he should always find a reason to be happy. Thinking back, Monik smiled at the memory of his training. His master had taken him in, along with other orphans who had no idea who their parents were, and taught him how to be a support mage. It wasn't just magic, though. His master had given him a new life, a new purpose. Sure, the old man could be annoying at times, always pushing him harder than he wanted, but Monik knew it came from a place of love. Having never known the warmth of a real family, Monik had come to think of his mentor as the closest thing he'd ever had to one. And now, standing here in the final moments of his journey, he found peace in that thought. Now that the end was near, our hero, Monik, started his dramatic monologue, reflecting on how the outside world might not see things the same way, but in his heart, he knew he lived a pretty good life. And as for the Stormbreakers, well, they'd survive just fine without him. Suddenly, he heard someone calling his name. At first, he figured it was just the first sign of death creeping in, like some kind of weird auditory hallucination. He shook his head, amused by the sad thought that he might be imagining things in his final moments. But then, the voice got sharper, more familiar. It wasn't a hallucination, it was Snow. And of course, Snow wasn't exactly thrilled. Bursting into a string of complaints, Snow grumbled about how Monik had yanked him out of the dungeon in such a reckless way. But Monik was more focused on one burning question. How on earth was Snow even here? Before he could piece things together, Rain chimed in, sounding just as confused. "Yeah, no idea how this happened. I was just standing right next to the warp point when I started hearing your voice." Monik, now wide-eyed, rushed over to check the warp point at his side. Could it really be? Had the thing somehow worked because of him? Monique remembered casting the Hitmist spell on Snow before bending reality, and surprise, everyone showed up. Hearing their voices near the end wasn't exactly the worst thing, but the girls weren't about to let him wallow in self-pity. Rain was the first to speak up, saying she'd heard everything from Snow. She couldn't believe Monique was trying to take on all the responsibility, sacrificing himself while hiding behind them instead of trusting them to share the load. And as if Rain's words weren't enough, Snow and Sandra chimed in, throwing shade at Monique for always saying the most negative things and showing off with his unnecessary bravado. Caught off guard, Monique had no choice but to apologize, though he tried to explain that he felt like he had no other option. But before he could finish, Rain cut him off, saying they weren't the kind of team that would just sit back and let things end like that. With that, she demanded that he call them to his side, ready to face whatever was coming. But Monique hesitated, refusing the idea, convinced they'd all be wiped out by the monster given their current level. He even pointed out how Snow had seen the creature with his own eyes, so it was only right that he, Monique, should be the one to end it. In his mind, Monique silently pleaded with the group not to waste their potential as the Stormbreakers, even if he was no longer around. He even suggested, half-jokingly, that they could one day avenge him. But Rain wasn't having it. With a heavy sigh, she laid down her ultimatum. If Monique was done for, she'd go down with him. Snow quickly agreed, saying he couldn't figure out how to keep living after such a disgrace. Sonny chimed in, sharing the same sentiment. There was no way he'd let his childhood friend become a casualty. Even Sandra, the youngest of the group, spoke up, claiming she had nowhere else to go if they lost Monique. It was clear they weren't going to let him sacrifice himself without a fight.